One way that a history of trauma can affect your relationships is through something called limerence. And this is the word for an obsession or infatuation that starts out just like falling in love, but it turns into a painful mental addiction to an idea of perfect love. And it robs everything good from your life, and it blocks you from experiencing real love. So limerence is common in people who were neglected or abused in childhood. Not everybody who had a harsh childhood ends up with limerence. Sometimes traumatized people, without an element of fantasy or addiction, there's just an attraction to people who are troubled, unavailable, inappropriate, or abusive. Now, because of abandonment wounds, it can be hard for us to leave any relationship. But the trauma-driven behavior I want to talk about here is limerence. And if you've experienced limerence, but this is the first time you've heard a name for it, what an epiphany, right? There's probably lights and sirens going off in your mind, like that's what it is, it's a thing. And it can be hugely helpful just to know that the painful obsession with people that you can't have is normal. It probably started as a coping mechanism when you were small, and it's possible to overcome it. So the word limerence was invented in the early 70s by Dorothy Tenov, and she'd been researching the experience of falling in love. And since then, in the writings of a few people who've continued to define it, limerence has come to mean something more than falling in love. It's the same set of feelings, but they go on and on and on, and they kind of make the leap into the realm of fantasy and even addiction. Why? Because it's for someone who is not reciprocating. It's almost as if limerence needs to remain in the fantasy realm to feel so magical. Because real life doesn't really support that magic feeling for long, right? This is a subject about which I've made dozens of videos, and together with other people who teach about limerence, we've come up with a language to describe it. So for example, the person you're limerent on is called the limerent object. Kind of weird, I know, or people call it the LO. And I didn't make it up, but it's good to have shorthand for the person that all that fantasy energy goes towards. And if that person were actually to love you back one day, which happens sometimes, the day-to-day relationship between you would probably neutralize the magical fantasy feeling, because interacting with someone in real life with all the dirty dishes and the socks on the floor and arguments about money tend to bring the lofty vision of another person down to earth, where real love actually exists. So the tendency to grow limerent on others, it's said to have a genetic component. Not always, and limerence appears to be just much more common in people who specifically were emotionally neglected as children. The ability to believe that love is possible, to hold onto and keep the fires burning on intense hope, is a survival strategy for a lot of kids who are emotionally neglected or even literally abandoned. And when it carries on into adulthood, it can lead to this compulsive enchantment with the person you can't have. It might be an ex, it might be somebody you barely know, or even a fictional character. And it's never someone you're actually in a real life reciprocal relationship with, or, if it became a relationship, it just couldn't stay limerent for long. Because again, not having love reciprocated from the person is part of what allows that magical liftoff feeling to be so powerful. So how do you know if you're limerent? Here are some signs. All right. In the early stages, and this is what people who have written about limerence call the glimmer. When you first met your limerent object, before you even knew you were attracted to them, did you feel a charge of excitement as if something great was beginning? Did you find yourself thinking about them, even if you're not seeing them? And the more you thought about them, the stronger your romantic feelings got. The intensity can be very surprising because normally I think in the progression of a romantic relationship, it builds by seeing each other. So this is something that builds by not seeing each other, or seeing each other but always having, reciprocated love not there. When you see them, it feels electrifying. That's a third sign. You feel more alive, more like your real self, as if the world just has been shown to you at last in Technicolor. And when you think about past meetings, do you go over and over them in your mind, thinking about what did they say, what did it mean? You want to see them more often, but you hide how strongly you feel. And you spend a lot of time calculating how you can bump into them or see them casually without tipping your hand that you're in love with them. So in a later stage, which you could call obsession, you fantasize about telling them how you really feel. You're hoping for reciprocation, but you don't actually tell them because you know on some level that if it were all out in the open and you said how you really felt, chances are good it would drive them away. And I think that's a condition of limerence. If you really were confident that they felt the same way about you and you were both available to be together, it wouldn't be going into this fantasy realm. It would be going into the real realm. Another sign is you begin to feel anxious and sad and empty unless you can see them, or at least think about them or talk about them. So, you end up like trying to seek opportunities to talk about them again without ever making it obvious to people you're talking to that you have a huge obsession with them. It's true. It's like walking a tightrope. Do you create a cover story so that you can talk about that person a lot to your friends who would disapprove if they knew how obsessed that you became with that limerent object? And, they might know more than you think, but do you have a cover story of like, no, I'm just talking about them in light of, this other thing in the context, just because it lifts your depression to talk about them at all? Do you go over and over in your mind what they said the last time you saw them? And do you look for hidden meaning that suggests that they feel the same way about you as you feel about them, but they didn't tell you directly, they hinted it, right? That's a sign, and rarely is it actually really happening. I guess it could really happen, but that is what limerent people do, is they, think and think and think about it and look, oh, it could have been a sign when he mentioned birds, because birds are a symbol of spiritual flight, and maybe blah, 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 and that's what we do. Do you avoid some of your usual activities so that you can be alone, so that nothing will interrupt your thoughts about your limerent object? Gradually, when you do that, the sad, anxious, and lonely feelings start to well up, and they get worse. So that leads to the end stage of limerence, and that's addiction, full-on addiction. You find yourself analyzing past communication, like non-romantic texts, emails. You're stalking their social media accounts to keep tabs on what they're doing from day to day, and maybe searching for signs that they're unhappy in their real-life relationship. Have you done that? And you become convinced that some of the things they say in texts and conversations and emails to you, for example, or in their post or social media, are coded messages designed to sound unrelated to you, but are actually secret messages directly to you. So it's not just like it's just casually delivered, but they're coding something to you to tell you, yes, I reciprocate your feelings. That is the fantasy. That's often, like if you've gotten to that stage, you are probably in end-stage limerence. And this is the big sign. You resort to magical thinking, telling yourself that even though they don't appear to be interested in you, and they say outright, if you've asked them that they're not interested in you, you believe there's a hidden or secret level of reality, such as, past lives, twin flames, a psychic connection, where you really are destined to be together. Very, very common out there. And then that takes another step up, and you actually seek out and spend money on people who will listen to your thoughts and dreams and stories about the person, which could be even certain therapists, for example, or who will tell you that on another plane, your relationship with this person is real and it's meant to be. And this is like psychics and tarot card readers, for example. And you fantasize about ways that you could disclose your feelings. Disclosure is like a big sort of turning point in limerence. It's one way that you can start to get over it, is just to like spill the beans on yourself. It's very likely to make the whole thing kind of blow up. The person doesn't want to deal with you. It's weird. It's awkward. So that's why you avoid it, is disclosure, is that they could leave you and then you won't have this fantasy to go to, this fantasy that emotionally you're really depending on to be able to cope with what's hard for you right now in your life. And here's the thought. You think, oh, if I could just disclose it in exactly the right way with just the most incredibly carefully precision crafted words, I could tip my hand without committing to that disclosure, and I could get out of it and have plausible deniability, you know, if it became unpleasant, if the person didn't reciprocate for it. The plausible deniability communication, sometimes in a limerent relationship, there is somebody who is giving you romantic energy, but they're not available, like, for example, a married person. And they will keep everything in the plausible deniability realm, because then they're not responsible. They can say, oh, I didn't do anything, I didn't know. And it keeps you, you know, feeding off of it and chasing after it and giving them the energy that they want out of it. The time and the money and the emotional energy that you pour into your obsession at this point begins to take a major toll on your life. If you have a partner, you are now damaging your relationship, sometimes intentionally. You know, people will just end their marriages to be alone with that fantasy or to actually go for it. If you're single, you become entirely unavailable for meeting or dating someone new. That's what limerence does. It just like occupies that entire part of you that could be having a relationship. In that sense, it's a form of avoidance. And when you have it and you're in this stage of it, you avoid telling that limerent object how you feel because you simply cannot afford to lose hope that somehow this is going to work out. Like, you need that hope. It's better to you to like have hope than ask and risk that it won't go out, even that it won't like turn into anything, even though there's a chance if you would disclose that it would turn into something. Like, it becomes preferable just to hold on to the hope. Or if they know your feelings and have rejected you plainly, you do what I call a limerent flip. And you find a way, you know, first they go, hey, get away, I don't feel that way, this is really uncomfortable, stop. And you go, oh, okay, gosh, I'm so ashamed, you stop. And then a few days pass, and then your mind does this flip. And it goes, you know what? I actually think what they're doing is sending a coded message to me. And you find a way to double down and continue the obsession. That's when you know it's far gone. The painful emotions come in waves, especially now that you've grown isolated from other people, which you have to in order to live in fantasy, and you feel immobilized. That's a huge characteristic of it. Like you just can't like initiate anything. You don't want to do anything. You're exhausted and you're deeply depressed. And it seems like the only thing that would help is if the person would come to you at last and be yours. Has this happened to you? When this is going on, you continue in this pattern, and until a new person comes along, or, you know, something comes to intervene and you realize how terrible everything has become. A new person can come along and spark the glimmer, which usually happens right when it's needed, right when it's not possible to keep having hope in the limerent, the old limerent object, the glimmer appears again. And if you're limerent, you believe that the glimmer is like a sign from heaven. But, you know, because of how it all plays out, what's a lot more likely is that glimmer, it's a adaptation, it's a coping mechanism inside your psychological being that just finds a way to, once again, find love where there is no love. And so it's not easy, but you can heal your pattern of limerence when you get honest with yourself that this is what's going on with you emotionally and psychologically. And if you want to break out of limerence, you're going to need tools to help you identify limerent thinking and to process the thoughts and feelings that tend to drive you to a world of fantasy. There's usually a lot of pain and lack of joy that drives you in that direction. You're going to need activities that give you joy and that give you meaning and that give you connection. You will need people. You need the support of people who understand what it's like, and they're healing themselves too. And you'll find other people who are working to heal limerence in 12-step programs like Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. You can search online for literature and meetings near you for that. You can find support and tools in Crappy Childhood Fairy. Our membership program supports people in all the phases of healing from childhood trauma. And the stuff that happens around relationships is a big one. Not everybody has that, but so many do. A lot of people have it in friendships, and they even get limerent feelings toward friends or mother figures. I've seen that a couple times. So, you know, we have weird coping mechanisms that enabled us to survive in childhood. Sometimes it carries into adulthood. And there's enough narrative out there to just feel like this is normal, but it's not. It's blocking you from having love. So if you want to learn more about it, if you want these written down, what I just told you about the signs of limerence, I've got a PDF that outlines it. You can download it right here, and I will see you very soon.